To Zanarkand, a Final Fantasy X fan-made audiobook project. Chapter 5, Besaid Temple. The air was thick with heat and the occasional sea breeze sweeping through as they made their way down to Besaid. The path down the hill opened up to a view that made Titus slow his steps. Besaid village was nestled on a bluff overlooking the ocean, its cluster of straw-roofed huts blending seamlessly into the natural beauty of the island. The structures were simple but sturdy, arranged in a loose semicircle around a wide open space in the centre, like a communal square of sorts. The ocean stretched beyond the cliffs, its deep blue surface shimmering under the relentless sun, waves rolling endlessly against the jagged rocks below. A larger building loomed in the background, perched slightly higher on a rise, its stone architecture sweeping in elegant shades of a brilliant white, not unlike waves or ship sails. Despite its brilliant white, it did have an aged, slightly worn presence, like it had been watching over the village for a very long time. Its general shape, though, half reminded Titus of the Besaid temple, so he decided that's what it was, a temple. A waterfall not far away fed into a crystal-clear spring, its sound mixing with the distant laughter of children playing in the shallows. A dog barked, running circles around a group of kids kicking a blitzball through the sand. Near one of the huts, a woman hung up strips of fish to dry under the sun, while another worked on repairing a fishing net with practiced hands. It was peaceful. It didn't feel like a place where people worried about sin or fiends or anything worse. Waka, walking ahead, gestured lazily as he spoke. "Over there's the Crusaders' Lodge. Luzu and Gata usually crash there when they're not patrolling. Not a bad place if you need some gear or even a hot meal." Titus glanced at the large, dyed purple canvas tent, the same emblem from their armour etched into the wood above its entrance. Waka continued, pointing toward another hut closer to the centre of the village. "That one over there? That's mine." Titus smirked. "You get a whole house to yourself? Must be nice." Waka said nothing in response, like he either didn't hear Titus or was contemplating a response. However, he remained silent. They weaved through the village, past more palm trees swaying lazily in the sun, the chatter of villagers filling the air, people offering Waka friendly waves as they passed, which he returned enthusiastically with a wide, genuine smile. As they neared the entrance of what Titus assumed was a temple, Waka slowed suddenly, rubbing the back of his head. "Oh yeah, almost forgot." Titus raised an eyebrow. "What?" Waka turned to him, looking almost sheepish. "You remember the prayer, right?" Titus blinked. "The what now?" Waka sighed. "Thought so." Without another word, he demonstrated, cupping one hand over the other, giving a small bow as he did. Titus frowned. It wasn't anything complicated, just a small, respectful motion. Waka nodded toward him. "Go on, give it a shot." Titus hesitated, then mimicked the motion, cupping his hands and bowing slightly. Waka grinned. "Hey, not bad. That'll work." Titus rolled his shoulders. "What's it for?" Waka walked ahead, stepping into the temple doorway as he called over his shoulder. "It's a prayer to Yevon, yeah? Everyone in Spira does it." The interior of the building was cool and dark. The air was thick with the mingled scents of incense and ancient stone, proving Titus's guess to be correct. The flicker of candlelight traced gentle shadows along alcoves cut into the walls, their uneven glow leaving much of the temple's vast height in shadow. Columns stretched upward, disappearing into darkness, their surfaces worn smooth by time and reverence. The hush was broken only by the soft rustling of robes and the distant murmuring of prayers, rising and falling like the tide, blending into the stone itself. The room's circular design felt deliberate, with tiered steps forming gentle rows where villagers knelt or sat, hands clasped or resting palms up in their laps, some whispering prayers, others simply sitting in silence beneath the towering weight of history pressing down from above. An oculus in the center of the ceiling let a single beam of sunlight pierce the dimness, striking the floor like a divine spotlight, illuminating the wide stone tiles and the worn symbols carved into them, faded but never forgotten. The structure of the room was hauntingly familiar as Titus compared it to the room in Baj Temple he thought he was going to die in. He even saw a similar, ornate stone door at the top of an auspicious set of stairs leading from the center of the room. At the heart of the temple, monks moved with silent purpose, their blue robes brushing against the floor as they carried out their duties with practiced grace. Somewhere above, or perhaps deeper within the temple's recesses, a voice sang. High, wordless, a melody that wound around the air like a thin thread, repeating the same haunting notes over and over, lingering like a memory just out of reach. Titus paused, 1 foot halfway over the threshold, ears catching the melody like an echo of something familiar, and the connection to Baj Temple was confirmed. Before his rescue by the Al-Bed, he had heard someone singing the exact same melody somewhere in the building. Despite the temple being a ruin, jutting out in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight, there had been someone there. Someone who was not only happy to be there, but was showing their devotion to Yevon through song. Perhaps it had been a prayer for salvation. Either way, it was a woman who had been singing then. Here, in Besaid, the singer was a child, though Titus couldn't tell if it was a boy or girl. He would have guessed girl. Waka barely noticed his hesitation, striding confidently ahead and calling back over his shoulder, "Hang tight," before approaching one of the monks. The older man, his face creased with both age and the weight of his calling, wore flowing robes of deep blue, and the two exchanged a brief gesture, hands cupped, bodies bowed in unison, the prayer that Titus had only just learned. They spoke in low voices, their words indistinct beneath the song threading through the chamber. Though Titus was barely trying to listen, his attention was caught by the statues that circled the central area of the room. In Baj there had only been one standing, a woman clad in armor and raising a sword. The same statue stood here in Besaid as well, but now there were others. One, a man, perhaps in his 60s, though it was hard to tell with the stonework. He had a serious expression, long robes and a tricorn hat. Another was a younger woman, wearing what Titus could only describe as ribbons, and not too many at that. Her face was angular, her hair flowing and reaching her knees. There was also a bearded, elderly man, though he stood tall, wearing a cape. And the last man was dressed in long, flowing robes, with a tall hat of sorts. He held a staff by his side that had a number of interconnected rings at the top. The stonework was impressive, and Titus tried to imagine how one goes about carving interlocking rings out of stone. It made his head hurt, so he stopped. The song carried on, unchanged, weaving between the flicker of candlelight and the drifting haze of incense smoke, folding itself into the bones of the temple like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there. Familiar, yet just out of reach, like everything else in Spira so far. Waka suddenly returned, his expression more serious. A quick glance at the monk beside him said something was wrong. "Hey, brother, Rian here will fix you up, yeah?" Titus had completely forgot about his head wound, and upon being reminded, he felt an unmerciful throb that made him wince. Still, it wasn't enough to distract him from the look in Waka's face. Are you okay? Something up? Walker waved a hand, perhaps a little too dismissively. Nothing, brother. Just gotta get your head fixed up, yeah? Titus narrowed his eyes. Are you sure? You look worried just now. Walker gave him a tight grin, the kind that was meant to be reassuring, but did the opposite in this case. Come on, man. If I was worried, you'd know it. All right, let's go. Before Titus could press further, the monk turned, motioning for them to follow. Brother Rian, as he was supposedly named, stood waiting just off to the side. A man in his early 40s, with broad shoulders and a frame that might have once been powerful, but had softened with age and long days spent in prayer rather than physical labor. There was a sternness to his expression, the look of someone who had seen much and judged much, but it was tempered now, softened into something closer to quiet authority. When he beckoned for them to follow, there was no demand in the gesture, only the assumption that they would obey. The room he led them into was small compared to the open grandeur of the main temple, but it felt no less significant. It was cozy, though whether that was intentional or simply due to the clutter was hard to say. Shelves lined the walls, crammed haphazardly with books, scrolls, and weathered tomes, some stacked horizontally, where no space was left for them to stand upright. The floor was entirely covered with thick, well-worn pillows, some round, some square, all in faded blues, greens, and browns, their embroidery fraying from years of use. There were no chairs, only these soft cushions scattered across the floor, as if this was a place for conversations meant to last hours, casual but serious all the same. Brother Rian gestured for them to sit. His expression was unreadable. Titus sank into one of the pillows, sinking deeper than he expected, actually, his legs folding awkwardly under him. Walker flopped down beside him, far more at ease, stretching his legs out in front of him with a contented sigh. He looked like a man who came here often. The monk remained standing at first, hands folded at the waist, studying Titus with a look that wasn't quite suspicion, but close enough to make Titus feel like he was under a microscope. So, you're lucky to be in one piece, lad. Not many end up on our shores these days. What happened to you? Brother Rian's voice was low and calm, with just the faintest trace of the same island lilt Walker had. But where Walker's accent bent and stretched words with cheerful abandon, Rian's was far more subdued, barely there unless you were listening for it. Titus swallowed, mind racing to recall Riku's warning and Walker's earlier cover story. I don't really know, he said, choosing his words carefully. I was near sin. Too close, I guess. Next thing I knew, I woke up in the ocean. It was technically the truth, or at least close to it, and it felt safer than trying to explain the rest. Walker, however, clapped him on the back hard enough to make him lurch forward, laughing loud and easy. Ah, that's the new story, huh? When I found him, brother, said he was from Zanarkand. Can you believe that? Walker chuckled, his broad grin full of warmth, completely oblivious to how unhelpful he was being. Way to go, Walker, Titus thought, biting back the urge to groan out loud. At the mention of Zanarkand, Brother Rian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. His brow tightened, his mouth pressed into a thin line, his eyes narrowing just ever so slightly. For a moment, Titus thought the monk might call him a liar outright, but instead, Brother Rian merely gave a low hum, like a man hearing something too ridiculous to bother correcting. Impossible, he muttered under his breath, though the words were more for himself than anyone else. But praise be to Yevon that you survived sin's touch at all. He lifted his hands, palms together at chest height, one cupped over the other, bowing his head slightly in the now familiar prayer. The gesture was automatic, almost reflexive, but there was no warmth to it, just a habitual motion tied to rote reverence. Brother Rian stepped over to a low wooden shelf and pulled a small glass vial from one of its cubbies. The liquid inside shimmered faintly in the low light, a soft, almost golden hue. He handed it to Titus, who took it cautiously. Drink, he said simply. It will help. Edith hesitated for half a heartbeat before uncorking the vial and swallowing the potion in a few quick gulps. The taste was sharp, herbal, and slightly bitter, but warmth bloomed almost immediately in his chest, spreading outward until it reached the tips of his fingers. His head felt clearer, the dull ache behind his eyes easing to a manageable throb. Whatever was in that potion, it worked fast. Only after Tita set the empty vial aside did Waka glance over at him with a sheepish grin. Forgot to mention. He scratched the back of his neck. That stuff, might make you a little sleepy, huh? Titus blinked, already feeling the first hints of drowsiness tugging at the edges of his mind. Great, he muttered. Thanks for the warning. Brother Rian gave them both a small, polite nod. Rest well, traveller. With that, he turned and slipped out of the room, his robes whispering against the floor as he left them alone among the cushions and books. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Waka and Titus in comfortable silence for all of 3 seconds before Titus turned to him, raising an eyebrow. All right, spill it, Titus said, his voice heavy with fatigue, though curiosity was keeping him conscious for now. You've had that worried look ever since we got here. Waka's easy grin faltered slightly, his hand drifting back to the nape of his neck. Nah, it's nothing, brother. Don't worry about it. Titus gave him a flat stare. Come on. Waka sighed, stretching his legs out again and leaning back on his pillows. His gaze drifted to the ceiling, his expression shifting into something quieter before he spoke to the candles hanging from above. It's just the summoner. They haven't come back from the Chamber of the Faith yet. It's been a day already. Titus blinked, his sleep-addled mind tripping over the unfamiliar words. The who hasn't what now? Waka's head snapped around, eyes widening for a split second before he forced out a quick, awkward laugh. Don't worry about it, brother. It's got nothing to do with you. His smile was too wide, his voice just a little too loud. I'm just talking to myself. Titus tried to process that, but the weight of the potion was dragging him down faster than his mind could keep up. His body felt heavier by the second, eyelids drooping even as he fought to stay upright. Right, he muttered, shifting sideways until he slumped against the nearest pillow. Talking to yourself. He didn't even make it all the way down before sleep took him, his head falling onto the pillow with a soft thud. The fabric was cool against his skin, but his mind was already slipping away, pulled under the weight of the potion and the exhaustion that had been clawing at him all day. His last coherent thought was of Waka's voice, that casual, half-worried remark about how it had been a whole day already, the words floating like leaves on dark water. It's been a whole day already. The words twisted, blurred, folding into memory as his mind drifted, and when the darkness cleared, he was somewhere else. Home. The gentle rhythmic rock of the houseboat beneath his feet was the first thing he felt. That familiar sway, the faint creak of old wood adjusting to the tide, was so natural it felt like it was part of him. Sunlight poured in through the windows, reflecting off the water and painting rippling gold across the low ceiling and the walls covered in blitzball posters and decked memorabilia, framed photos, trophies, a cracked pair of goggles mounted like some kind of relic. His dad's things were always there, bigger than life, even when Jecht wasn't. Except today, the usual hum of background noise, laughter, clinking cups, the occasional shout of a friend calling him out from the dock, it was all missing. The houseboat was full of people, but the energy was off. Muted. Titus, maybe 6 or 7 years old, stood half hidden in the doorway, fingers curled tight around the metallic frame, peeking into the main room where a small cluster of neighbours and family friends were gathered. No one smiled. A middle-aged man stood near the window, arms crossed over his chest, his voice low but clear. It's been a whole day already. There was no urgency to it, just a tired inevitability. Like he'd said the same thing 3 times already, each repetition dragging a little more hope out of the room. Near him, sitting stiffly on the edge of the worn couch, was Tidus's mother. She had a dirty blonde ponytail and kind eyes. Her back was too straight, her hands folded too tightly in her lap, knuckles white against her knees. The smile she usually wore like armor had slipped, leaving her looking exposed, fragile in a way that Tidus didn't often see. Her gaze was fixed somewhere out the window, though there was nothing to see except the glinting water and the hazy blur of the distant city skyline. "Perhaps you could go and look for us," she said, her voice soft, but with the kind of politeness that only thinly masked desperation. The man shifted, glancing toward her with the awkward stiffness of someone who wanted to help, but knew there was nothing to be done. "People are searching for him now," he said, almost apologetic. "The boats are still out. We'll find him." Her lips trembled, just for a moment, before she offered a quick, polite nod. "Thank you." There was nothing else to say. The rest of the people were quiet, as if they were afraid to say anything, and were happy to let their condolences be shared through offerings of food rather than words. But after a time, they left. The man who had spoken was the last to leave, sliding the door closed behind him, leaving only the whisper of water lapping against the hull. Tidus felt his small hands tighten against the doorframe, his stomach twisting with something he didn't have words for. It wasn't sadness. It was something more brittle. Anger, maybe, or resentment so tightly wound it felt like a knot he just couldn't untangle. "Who cares if he comes back or not?" The words spilled out before he could stop them, high-pitched and petulant, the voice of a child too young to understand the weight of what he was saying. But he meant it. Right then, he meant every word. His mother's head snapped around, her wide eyes locking onto him with startling clarity, like she'd forgotten he was there. Her fingers curled tighter around the fabric of her skirt. "But he might die!" There was no reprimand in her voice, no scolding tone, only that same quiet desperation, thin and stretched too far. Tidus's fists clenched at his sides, tiny knuckles going white. "Fine, let him!" His throat burned, and his eyes stung, but he wasn't going to cry. Not for him. Never for him. His mother's face crumpled, just for a second, and she turned away as if hiding her own pain would protect him from it. Her voice was smaller when she spoke again, trembling with something fragile and raw. Do you hate him so?" Edith didn't answer. His jaw ached from clenching it too tight. Her hands uncurled, falling limp in her lap. "If he dies, you'll never be able to tell him how much you hate him." That stopped Tidus. The words hit somewhere deep, in a place he hadn't known existed until that moment. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't even know if he wanted to. His small chest rose and fell, breaths sharp and uneven. But no more words came out. The silence stretched between them. The only sound was the soft creak of the houseboat and the distant call of gulls outside. His mother turned back toward the window, and Tidus stood frozen in his doorway, trapped between his anger and something he couldn't name, something heavy and cold curling in his stomach. The memory began to dissolve, the colours blurring into gold and grey, his mother's voice fading into the song, the same melody drifting through the temple now, weaving itself into the edges of the dream until he couldn't tell where the past ended and the present began. He stirred, the edges of sleep still clinging to him like damp mist. The room was dim, no, almost Pitch dark, actually, and the air had cooled considerably since he dozed off. The faintest sliver of moonlight cut through a narrow window near the ceiling, silvering the edges of the bookshelves and pillows scattered across the floor. His head felt heavy, stuffed with cotton almost, and when he raised a hand to his forehead to steady the spinning sensation, his fingers found smooth, unbroken skin. No trace of the wound remained. That potion Brother Rian gave him was serious stuff. If only it worked on everything else wrong with his head. Pushing himself upright, Tita sat for a moment, letting the world steady itself. The silence wasn't complete. There was always something. The rustle of leaves outside, the faint creak of the temple settling, and even the song. That same repeating song by the child's voice somewhere in the temple. Titus couldn't help but wonder if they ever stopped, or slept. Waka was nowhere to be seen, and the stillness had a weight to it, the kind that only settles over a place when everyone's asleep. With a grunt, Titus got to his feet, swaying slightly before catching his balance. Maybe walking around would help shake off the lingering haze from the potion. No point trying to sleep again with his head buzzing like this. He eased the door open, wincing at the soft creak, but no one stirred. The corridor outside was just as dim, the dying candlelight from the main hall spilling faintly down the passage. Moving on instinct, Titus followed, padding silently across the cold stone floor, his bare feet making only the faintest scuff against the worn surface. As he stepped into the main hall, the vast chamber looked completely different from before. Only a handful of candles flickered now, their light casting long, distorted shadows against the high walls. The emptiness felt almost unnatural, and the statues looking down on him looked like they could have been holding their breath. The song was even stronger here. The same ethereal melody, repeating endlessly, though it was louder now, clearer. It slipped through the air like mist curling around unseen corners, and Titus turned his head, ears straining to locate the source. The sound drifted down from above, filtering through the central chamber, trailing down the steps that led toward the great ornate door, the one that had been shut tight when he arrived. But now the door was gone, the passageway wide open. The gaping doorway yawned like a mouth into the temple's belly, a dark passage swallowing the thin candlelight at the edges. There was no one there, no monks, no guardians, no sign that anyone had passed through, yet the door was open, as though it had been waiting for him. Titus hesitated. Every instinct told him he was not supposed to be here. But the song was coming from somewhere beyond, and curiosity gnawed at him harder than caution. And so with a breath that barely made it past his lips, he started up the steps. The cool air thickened as he crossed the threshold, the temperature dropping enough for goosebumps to rise on his arms. The stone corridor beyond was lined with candles set into small alcoves, their flames flickering in a draught that Titus couldn't feel. The walls were smoother here, less weathered. The carvings were more deliberate and deeper, though their meanings were just as lost on him. The singing led him onward, always just ahead, the melody tugging like a thread wrapped around his chest. Every step deepened the sense that he shouldn't be here, that this was a path meant for wandering strangers, but Titus's feet kept moving regardless. The corridor ended in a small circular chamber, its floor smooth and polished, with no furniture or decoration to break the simplicity. The only feature was a raised, round platform in the center, a dais of sorts. It was too small to be a stage, but that's exactly what it reminded Titus of. Some sort of private karaoke backroom, where the platform was where you stood when you were showing off for your friends. Except here, there was no seats, wires or screens, just stone and candlelight and the empty hush of the air, broken only by that same haunting melody. The singing sounded so close now, close, but not here, like it was coming from the walls. It seemed to drift up from the platform itself, the melody emanating from the stone beneath his feet. Titus's brow furrowed as he stepped closer, the faint vibration of the song thrumming faintly through the floor, almost too subtle to notice. He stepped up onto the platform, half expecting to trigger some kind of an alarm, or to have Waka burst in and drag him back by the collar, but nothing happened. At least that was until he realized where the sound was really coming from. It truly was beneath him. The second the thought fully formed, the dais gave a soft, mechanical click. Titus staggered slightly, arms out for balance as the floor shifted beneath them. The dais was descending, lowering smoothly into the stone like a lift. It wasn't a stage after all, it was an elevator of sorts, ancient and perfectly concealed until now. The platform continued to sink, the faint mechanical hum blending seamlessly with the rising melody, that eerie ethereal singing, now louder, no longer some distant echo, but a presence, wrapped firmly around him like mist curling through the air. The descent felt longer than it probably was, long enough for Titus to question whether this was really the right idea, but not long enough for him to turn back. The air grew cooler, the stone walls pressing closer as they rose around him, candlelight flickering as the elevator reached its destination with a gentle, almost respectful thunk. The chamber was smaller than he expected, round like the other, lit with dozens of low-burning candles placed in shallow alcoves carved directly into the stone walls. The air had a dry stillness to it, the kind that made his breath sound too loud for his own ears. Directly ahead, there was no door, but something softer, a curtain made of long hanging beads, each one catching the candlelight with a faint glimmer. The beads swayed slightly, though there was no breeze, the movement delicate and almost hypnotic. The beaded curtain parted suddenly, and Waka pushed through, his expression caught somewhere between alarm and exasperation. "Hey, hey, hey!" Waka's voice was loud in the quiet chamber, bouncing off the stone. "What's gotten into you? You shouldn't be here." He stepped forward, lowering his voice, though it still carried that unmistakable island warmth. "Only summoners, apprentice summoners, and their guardians can enter here. It's tradition. Very important." Titus crossed his arms, his own confusion tipping over into frustration. "So what about you? You just wander in whenever you want?" Waka puffed up slightly, half proud, half defensive. "Me? I'm a guardian." Titus frowned. "A guardian?" Before Waka could answer, a woman's voice cut sharply through the air from somewhere beyond the curtain, low, firm, and just short of outright angry. "What is going on out there?" Waka winced, physically shrinking down an inch like a scolded child. His hand went to the back of his neck, rubbing it nervously. That's Lulu," he muttered quickly. "I'll explain later." Then, more urgently, "Look, summoners, they go on a pilgrimage, yeah? Pray at every temple in Spira. Guardians protect them. Guardians in there now?" He hesitated, glancing back at the curtain like he could already feel the heat of Lulu's glare. "Well, Lulu's one of them, and she's got a short fuse, yeah? Real short. And the other guy—" Walker trailed off with a shrug. "Hard to say what he's thinking, you know." Titus had about a dozen more questions, but Walker was already moving, brushing aside the beaded curtain. "Well, you came this far," he said over his shoulder. "Might as well come in." Titus followed, stepping into a larger chamber. This room felt older, not from use, but from age itself, like time had settled here, untouched and undisturbed. It truly felt, dare he say, ancient? The stone beneath Titus's feet was smooth in some places and uneven in others, not polished by the passage of countless feet, but by the slow creep of damp air and the settling of ancient dust. The candlelight flickered weakly against the walls, which seemed to lean inward ever so slightly. The vibe Titus got from both Waka and this room was that it was to be seen only by a handful of people, and even they only came here in moments of rare significance. Like in the main temple chamber, there was a large staircase that led up to a large stone ornate door. Standing on the steps, one figure on each side, were the guardians Waka had mentioned. To the left stood a massive, towering figure, a feline-like humanoid covered in thick blue-grey fur, his broad frame almost statuesque in its stillness. A long halberd rested easily at his side, the metal tip gleaming faintly in the candlelight. The only thing breaking his otherwise symmetrical, stoic appearance was the jagged stump of a broken horn jutting from the centre of his forehead, casting a jagged shadow on his face. His sharp eyes followed Titus's every movement, though his expression never flickered from that stern, almost statuesque calm. The woman stood a few years older than Titus, maybe Waka's age, her sharp, carmine eyes fixed on him with a look that was equal parts suspicion and exhaustion. Long black hair, twisted into elaborate braids with loose strands clinging to her pale face, framed her stern expression. Her dress was dark, low cut at the top, with a heavy fur collar sliding off her shoulders, while the lower half was little more than a tangle of belts and buckles layered into a skirt that swayed with her every movement. One hand rested on her hip, the other cradling a small plush doll, a pale-coloured thing with a stitched smile and a red pom-pom bobbing from its head, the way someone might carry a trusted weapon rather than a toy. Despite the doll having stitched buttons for eyes, Titus could have sworn it was watching him too. "Who are you?" the woman, Lulu presumably, demanded, her voice cool but edged with frustration. "And what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here." Waka raised both hands, palms out, grinning sheepishly. "It's my fault, Lulu. Left the door open, see?" Titus, feeling defensive under the sheer weight of her glare, shrugged. "And I heard the singing and I just kinda followed it." Lulu's brows lowered into a scowl. "Silence." Her voice cracked like a whip, startling in the small chamber. "If anything goes wrong now, it will be your fault." As if to punctuate her words, the little doll in her arms seemed to shift, its head tilting just slightly toward Titus. It was close to giving Titus the creeps. Waka leaned in, stage whispering to Titus. "See? Told you she gets mad easy." "This is not funny, Waka," Lulu snapped, her voice pitched lower now, but no less sharp. "If Brother Rian finds out you brought him down here." She didn't finish the sentence, but the implied consequences hung heavy in the air. Titus, who was desperate to divert tension away from himself as well as piece everything together, pointed at the large ornate doors at the top of the stairs. "So, is that where the summoner is?" Lulu's lips tightened, her glare softening just slightly into something closer to guarded suspicion. "Who are you?" she asked again, more quietly this time. But before Titus could answer, the singing stopped. The sudden silence was almost jarring after the constant presence of the melody. All three of them, Waka, Lulu, and the Blue Guardian, turned their eyes to the door at the top of the stairs. Slowly, with a deep, echoing groan of ancient stone, the door began to open. A young woman stepped out, small and slight, her movements unsteady. She wore flowing white and lavender robes, her gold sash around her waist slightly askew, her dark hair sticking in strands to her flushed face. She was trembling, sweat dotting her brow, her breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. Her knees buckled on the first step, but before Titus could even think to move, the Blue Guardian was already there, his speed startling for someone so large. He caught her with effortless grace, lifting her off her feet as though she weighed nothing at all. In his arms, she looked impossibly small. Her voice was faint, barely above a whisper, but her words carried into the hushed chamber as if the stones themselves were listening. I have done it, she said, each syllable trembling with exhaustion and pride. I have become a summoner.